In the late 1980s, music producer Frank Farian was on a mission to create the perfect pop act. He discovered two performers, Rob Pilatus from Germany and Fabrice Morvan from Paris. They had the look, but not the voices. Session singers were used to create the debut album of Milli Vanilli, with Rob and Fab as the faces only. The marketing behind Milli Vanilli was a masterclass in image creation. Their album, Girl You Know It's True, was packed with pop hits, and Rob and Fab had flashy clothes and great dance moves and a lot of charisma. They became instant stars and sold millions of records. A tour was scheduled, and the plan was to have them lip sync. In 1990, they won a Grammy for Best New Artist, but behind the scenes, Rob and Fab were struggling to keep up with the lie. In interviews, reporters were noticing their thick accents and starting to question whether they were actually the singers on their songs. That same year, the truth came out when, during a live MTV performance, the track that they were lip-syncing to started to skip. Girl, you know it's, girl, you know it's, girl, you know. It's horrible. You can watch it on the other video app, and it's devastating. They're shocked, they don't know what to do, they run off stage, and it's embarrassing. Shortly after, they had to admit that they were not, in fact, singing on their records, and their Grammy was even taken from them. Amidst the public humiliation, Rob and Fab attempted to salvage what was left of their career. They actually were singers, but the record company didn't trust that they were good enough. So now, out on their own, they started their own group called Rob and Fab, and they released an album in the early 90s, trying to get back onto the charts. In 1998, after years of struggling with addiction and being in and out of jail, Rob Pilatus died of a drug overdose. A few years later, the real singers behind Milli Vanilli came out and started their own group called The Real Milli Vanilli and were lobbying to get their Grammy back. But the public had already moved on, and they never really gained much traction. In 2021, director Brett Ratner had been set to make a biopic about the two of them. Fab actually sold his life rights to the movie company that was going to make it, but because of allegations against Brett Ratner, the movie halted production and has never been made. Because of the new Ryan Murphy series on Netflix called Monsters, which tells a very cheesy version of the Menendez brothers story, and the Menendez brothers are not happy with how this story is being told. One of their hit songs, Girl, I'm Gonna Miss You, is in this series and has caused a resurgence of interest in Milli Vanilli. Because of the series, the song is back in the charts, which is a wild twist in this marketing story. Rob has continued with his music and seems to be doing well, which is great because I am rooting for him. I've always felt so bad for Milli Vanilli and what they did to them in the name of making money. Have you heard of Canada's Highway of Tears? It's a stretch of road in northern BC that's home to the murders of 18 women, mostly Indigenous, as well as many, many disappearances since 1969. Unlike most serial cases like this, there isn't just one likely killer, but many. I'm Mel Zee. I do deep dives into death, true crime, and weird pop culture stuff, so if you're a weirdo too, follow me. The Highway of Tears refers to a 725-kilometer stretch of Highway 16 that goes from Prince George to Prince Rupert in British Columbia. Since the late 1960s, many women who are mostly Indigenous have gone missing or have been found murdered along this desolate road. With its challenging terrain and long stretches of nothingness, dense forests, and few resources, many women have been forced to hitchhike along this road, making them vulnerable to predators. This case is only one of many that disproportionately affects Indigenous women. Another notable case is the many, many, many missing Indigenous women in Vancouver's downtown east side, a lot of whom were suspected to be victims of serial killer Robert Pickton. Part Part of the reason people believe that he was able to kill for so long is because his victims were sex workers or indigenous or both. Side note, there was recently an effort made by police to get rid of all the evidence remaining from the Picton case while he's serving prison time. But in May, he was killed in prison. So any kind of justice that was hoped for from missing women who are believed to be victims of his, the chances of justice now are very slim. All of this ties into a much bigger issue, which is known as the Missing and Murdered Indigenous Women, or MMIW, which is a human rights crisis in Canada and the US and many other parts of the world. In Canada, the homicide rate for Indigenous women from 2001 to 2015 was almost 6 times higher than that for other women. Although Indigenous women make up only 4% of the population of Canadian women, 16% of all women murdered in Canada between 1980 and 2012 were Indigenous. An RCMP report was released in 2021 that was highly criticized because the numbers were incomplete and don't show the full picture. It didn't include unexplained or suspicious deaths or any possible next steps or solutions. Amnesty International raised concerns that the deaths of Indigenous women and girls are not always fully and properly investigated, and that as a result, some murders are classified as accidental deaths. And because police don't consistently record the Indigenous identity of victims, these numbers are likely very inaccurate. Although all women are most likely to be murdered by someone they know intimately, Indigenous women face that threat too, but they also face the extra threat of acquaintances and strangers murdering them at much higher rates. The Highway of Tears murders are not generally thought to be the work of a serial killer, but possibly multiple serial killers or multiple people who didn't know these women. However, there was one confirmed killer, and that was Bobby Jack Fowler, who was a known criminal transient worker in the area during the 70s and 80s. He was linked through DNA to the murder of Colleen McMillan in 1974. He died in prison in 2006, and it's not known whether or not he had any connections to any other murders. Besides him, no other possible offenders have been made public. The disappearances and deaths of women on Canada's Highway of Tears have often been met with silence or indifference or inadequate investigations. For years, families and communities have been left in the dark, fighting for justice, answers, and closure. There has been some improvement of transportation along Highway 16, making it so hitchhiking is much less common. There's also been many efforts from community leaders to bring awareness to the issue of missing and murdered Indigenous women, including Red Dress Day and the Downtown East Side Women's Memorial March, along with ongoing investigations and advocacy by Indigenous communities and organizations that continue. But clearly, much more needs to be done. One musician's death that I will never get over and that I still wonder about because of the weird circumstances is Elliott Smith. I'm Mel Zee. I do deep dives into death, true crime, and weird pop culture stuff. So if you're a weirdo too, follow me. Elliott Smith was such an incredible musician. He was prolific. He was emotional. He wrote such beautiful songs and was so beloved. But he also struggled severely with drug and alcohol abuse and depression and other mental health issues. On October 21st, 2003, he and his girlfriend, Jennifer Chiba, were fighting in the afternoon in their apartment in Echo Park in California. And reportedly, Jennifer locked herself in the bathroom and was taking a shower when she heard Elliott Smith scream. She came running out and saw him with a knife in his chest, which she then pulled out, and then he collapsed, and she called an ambulance. He was taken to the hospital where he was put into surgery. 2 wounds in his heart were sutured, and they tried to resuscitate him with defibrillation. It worked once, but it didn't work the second time, and he was pronounced dead later that afternoon. The autopsy report showed 2 stab wounds, and the question has always been, was this a suicide? How could you stab yourself 2 times in the chest and still be standing? There were also no hesitation wounds, which there usually are with a suicide. They were both about 18 to 19 inches from his head and pointing slightly downward, which is consistent with somebody stabbing themselves. But I think it's just so horrifying to think of somebody actually doing that to themselves. And for his fans, it is very difficult to imagine that somebody could harm themselves in such a drastic and painful way. So a lot of people don't want to believe it, even though it's likely that that is actually what happened, though his case is still technically open because there is no resolution to this. His death hasn't been ruled a suicide or a homicide. It is undetermined. One of the things that makes me think that this was absolutely a suicide was that there was a note found nearby that said, "I'm so sorry, love Elliot, God forgive me." What do you think? Do you think that it was a suicide? Do you think it was a homicide? What could have happened? Either way, it's just so awful. Every time I hear about a missing person and they cannot be found, I think about this case because the way that this case was solved is so nuts. And the fact that the answers were right under everyone's noses the whole time honestly keeps me up at night. I think about this case like an unhealthy amount. I'm Mel Zee. I do deep dives into death, true crime, and weird pop culture stuff. So if you're a weirdo too, follow me. In 1997, William Moult, a quiet 40-year-old man who rarely went out, decided to go out to a club. He said goodbye to his girlfriend, went out to the club. He had a few drinks, even though he rarely drank, and then at some point decided he was going to head home. So he called his girlfriend to tell her that he was on his way home. He did not seem inebriated. He got into his car and started heading home and was never seen or heard from again. Nobody had any idea what happened to him, and they wouldn't for over 20 years. The town that this took place in was Lantana, Florida, and a man who used to live there wanted to see what his old neighborhood looked like. So he went onto Google Earth and searched for his old neighborhood and then started zooming in on different parts of the town. He sees a pond and somehow notices this small little white speck. He zooms in and can see that there's something under the water there, and it kind of looks like a car. So he goes to his old neighborhood, brings his own drone, flies it over the pond, and can see that clearly there is a car under the water. So he contacts police. The police respond with a dive team, and they go under the water and discover the car from William Moult, which he disappeared in back in 1997. Inside the car is William Moult's skeletal remains. He has been in this pond since 1997. All these years, people wondering what happened to him, absolutely no theories, no clues at all. And it turns out that he somehow lost control of his car, ended up in the pond. Nobody heard anything, nobody saw anything. And then 22 years later, a shift in the water and new technology made it so that somebody could see that he was in there. And so now, anytime that I hear about somebody who's been missing and nobody knows what happened, there's no clues, nobody knows where they are, I always think of this story and think it has to be just the most simple thing that happened. Their car is hidden somewhere, they're in a body of water, it's not aliens, it's not a murder conspiracy, it's some kind of accident that nobody has discovered yet. Maybe they'll discover it when some new technology comes out in a few years. But for now, we're just waiting to find that person in some swampy pond somewhere. I'll never get over it. It's crazy. So when I tell you that the case of Amy Bradley and the cruise ship disappearance shook me, please believe it to be true and prepare yourself, because this is a horrible story. Let's go back in time. It's 1998. Amy Lynn Bradley is 23 years old. She's just graduated from college. Her family invited her on a cruise to celebrate. And even though she has an uneasy feeling about it, she decides to go anyway. Amy and her family are having a great time on the cruise. It's March 23rd, and they are partying in the cruise ship's disco. Despite Amy's initial bad feeling about the cruise, she was having a good time, though she was a little bit creeped out by some of the crew members and felt that they were paying a little bit too much attention to her, which her family actually did notice. The band stops playing and the music continues. Amy and one of the band members, Alistair Douglas, also known as Yellow, are dancing together. The cruise ship's photographer captures them on the dance floor having a great time. Around 3:30 a.m., Amy and Brad returned to their cabin. Brad went to sleep and Amy stayed on the balcony. The ship's keycard system logged them in at just about the same time, around 3:35 a.m. Around 5:30 a.m., Amy's dad, Ron, woke up and saw her sleeping on this patio, and so he rolled over and went back to sleep. At 6 a.m., he woke up again and she was gone. Her family immediately notified the crew and begged them to make an announcement calling for Amy over the PA system, but they said that it was too early and failed to intervene. Shortly after Amy disappeared, the ship was docking in Curacao, and the family begged the crew members to not allow any of the passengers to leave before they could search for Amy in the rooms, but they ignored their pleas and passengers were allowed to leave. Although Yellow claimed to have parted ways with Amy at 1 a.m., witnesses said that they saw him with her later than that. A waiter on the ship had also earlier asked about Amy by name and then invited her to meet up with him once they docked. The crew and band members and any remaining passengers were interviewed, but nothing came of that. But the amount of attention that the crew was giving her before she disappeared compared to the very little help that they provided when she disappeared seems very suspicious. Months passed and there were sightings. In August of 1998, 2 Canadian tourists saw a distressed woman on the beaches of Curacao, and they said she had matching tattoos to Amy's, which were quite distinctive, including a baby Tasmanian devil spinning a basketball on her shoulder and a sun on her back. A Navy officer later claimed to have seen a woman that called herself Amy in a brothel in Curacao in 1999. He waited a while to tell anyone about it because he was in a brothel, and by the time they investigated, the brothel had burned down and nobody could be found. What he told investigators was that a woman who seemed frightened had come up to him and asked him for help, saying that her name was Amy Bradley from Virginia. And now this is the part that I lose sleep over. In 2005, the family was sent an email with these photographs attached, and it came from a company who tries to find victims of trafficking, and this woman was seen on one of the trafficking websites. Many people have done comparisons of these two faces, and you can see the resemblance in the ears, the amount of earrings that Amy Lynn Bradley had, the shape of her ears. And then if you just look at her face, what I think is so horrifying about this is how distressed she looks. She looks like she's been drugged or just severely traumatized. And that look in her eye is just like, it haunts me. I hate to even look at these pictures. There are so many similarities that it's really spooky. You can't deny it. In these photos, there's no tattoos visible, so a definitive ID can't be done, but it really looks like her, and her family believes this is her. Unfortunately, nothing has ever come of these photos. They don't know who this woman is if it's not Amy, or where they came from, where this website is based out of. They didn't get any information from these photos. One of the theories of Amy's disappearance was that she had just fallen overboard, but that is contested by her family, who say she was an avid swimmer, and also that somebody would have heard her scream and go overboard or hit the deck or something. There would have been some evidence of that. In 1999, Amy Bradley's family was scammed by a man claiming to be a Navy SEAL who could see Amy, who was being held captive. He was giving them updates constantly and getting money from them. Over $200,000 they paid, and it turned out to be a scam. He served 5 years in prison for this, and what a massive piece of shit that man is. In 2010, Amy Lynn Bradley was officially declared dead, but her family continues to search. They don't believe that she's dead. They believe those pictures are of her, that she's been trafficked, and that she's out there somewhere. The FBI case on her is also still open, even though she's officially declared dead. In 2011, a jawbone washed ashore in Aruba, and it was tested to see if it was Amy's, but it was not. I really seriously hope that she's found someday, because this is such an awful story, and I won't ever stop thinking about it.